Is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Nelson Phillips, and I'm going to be talking today a little bit about some of the interesting things that are happening around leadership and leadership competencies, leadership skills, leadership development that are occurring as we see this process of digital transformation happening in organizations and in industries. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm really happy that you joined me today. This is an area that I'm really interested in, so I'm both very happy to talk to you a bit about it, but we're also going to try to have lots of time at the end for questions. So I'll talk for maybe 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes or so, and then we'll get into some questions and hopefully have 10, 15 minutes to get through some of your questions and to see what you think about this stuff, because I think it's really interesting and lots of people are involved, are feeling it, depending on what your role is as a HR, or you trying to develop leaders, or are you a leader yourself? So I'd be very interested to hear what you have to say. This is been organized by the executive education group here at Imperial College. I do a lot of stuff with them. We have a number of different programs. If you're interested in this kind of stuff and you're interested in doing more, please come and have a chat with us about what's available. We have a look at our website. We do lots of things around technology, innovation, digital transformation, whether that's in health or finance, innovation, and also, of course, leadership, which is something I do a lot in. So if you're interested in that, I'm very happy to have a conversation with you about that and see what else we can do that might help you as you think through and try to also develop your leadership skills around these changes that we're seeing due to digital transformation. So who am I? Well, my name is, as I said, Nelson Phillips. I'm a professor here in the business school. I teach across a couple of topics that we're going to talk about today. I teach strategy. I've taught that for many, many years. But it's very hard to separate these days strategy from innovation. So innovation is core to the conversations in strategy. I also teach digital business, which is the application, of course, of strategy and innovation in a particular kind of sector, and that has driven my interest in leadership and this question of leadership and technology leadership and digital transformation. So that's what I want to talk about today. I started out life as a computer engineer, so this kind of I'm bringing together my interest in computers and all things digital, and my interest in leadership and strategy. So that's really where I live. So I'm basically, as I say there on the slide, I'm a geek interested in leadership and strategy. And if so I generally can test people by asking them if they know what that yellow device in the corner is, and whether they've ever had one. So if you know what that is, you get 1 point, 1 geek point. If you if you owned one at some point in your life, you get five geek points. This is of course a slide rule which predates the digital world, but is of course core to geekdom. I actually have a faculty member here, a good friend of mine, who has a collection of slide rules. So this is that's taking it to a whole different level, but this is a good indication of just how geeky you are by whether or not you know what that is. Anyway, let's get into this question. You can feel free to type questions anytime, because if you have a question that comes to you, I may or may not answer it at that moment. I'll probably come back to it at the end, unless it's just a clarification question. But we'll be collecting together those questions, and I'll be watching them as we go along. So feel free anytime to type in a question, and we'll try to deal with as many as we can at the end. As well as if I see a clarification question, I'll do my best to clarify as we go along. So let's get into this. Basically, what I want to talk a little bit about, very sort of quite briefly, given it's such a big topic, is this idea of digital transformation, and it's really, I think, one of the most kind of important thing that's happening right now in society when it comes to organizations and leadership, and also entrepreneurship. But I'm going to focus mostly today on digital transformation and what it means for you as a leader. So I'm going to kind of focus the conversation a little bit. I could talk about more broadly about this, and I will talk about it for the first little bit quite broadly, and then get into it much more about what it means for leadership, and hopefully that's what you're expecting and what your interests are today. So let's start with digital transformation. And I think digital transformation is such an interesting thing because it's so fundamental. And I like to begin by talking about the last time people talked about about transformation, use that term transformation, looking at industries, looking at the economy, and also looking at society more broadly. And I've included 3 pictures here that I think summarize nicely these 2 transformations and why we're using this word transformation. The first one, of course, is the Industrial Revolution and the transformation that occurred in society and in the economy as we moved from an agrarian society, basically with some pretty basic technologies, and invented a whole set of technologies that drove a transformation of society at that point, right? So this is sort of the first picture to the second picture, from the horse and carriage to the early car. In many ways, this looks very similar. Of course, you see 4 wheels, some sort of propulsion system, person sitting in the car with some sort of steering mechanism. But of course, they're completely different, and I think they're symbolic of this first transformation. There's a famous academic who wrote a book called The Great Transformation, Carl Polanyi, and that book was about this transformation, this idea that it wasn't just about changing some technology. It was that technology drove a fundamental change, both in the economy but also in society. So when we go from the horse to the internal combustion engine, it's not just changing how we move around. It was part of a transformation of production, the assembly line. That car was produced by an assembly line. That carriage was produced by craft labor. It was also about transportation, how we moved around. It was about communication, right? So how we communicated with each other. You see in the background there, behind the car, is actually a suburb. The idea of suburbs appeared with this mass transportation. Also, education changed. Part of this was the invention of the printing press, the widespread the widespread availability of books and newspapers, and along with it, everyone learning to read, or almost everyone learning to read in modern democracies, because democracies require people to be literate. And what you saw is a transformation of society. What you saw is very interesting. For many generations in Europe, grandparents and grandchildren's life was basically the same. Grandparents and grandchildren both used horses and buggies. The way they lived, the kinds of jobs, what they ate, their life kind of pattern was very similar. Then suddenly, in a very short period of time, less than 100 years, you saw the industrialization of Europe, industrialization of North America. And what you see is a complete change in people's lifestyles, complete change in the nature of organizations, complete change in the nature of manufacturing, complete change in the nature of governments. This all happened in this great transformation that occurred around the Industrial Revolution and all the associated technologies. The argument now is that's happening again. So what's happening with digital technology, what's happening with the introduction of all kinds of new ways of communicating, of all this producing wealth, of education, all the things that we're seeing, this is creating another great transformation, right? This time digital transformation. So what we see is a car, Model T, and a car, of course that's a Tesla, and what I would argue is that those 2 cars are just as different as the horse and buggy to the Model T. Why? Because that car is, of course, an electric car, but that's not really the fundamental difference. What's different is that car is digital. If you own one of those cars, on a regular basis, it updates its software, and the car suddenly does new things. It has new features. What's interesting about that car is that it's the software is as important as the other components, and in fact, more important in many ways in managing the battery, managing the power system, but also the interface with the human that's riding in it, driving it, is fundamentally mediated by that digital technology. And Tesla is as much a software company as they are a car company, and this is, I would argue, as different and is just as symbolic of the change as going from the horse and buggy to the Model T. So this is really, again, a fundamental change, and we're using that word transformation because it's so fundamental. Excuse me. So what is this, from a business point of view, I'll begin with that. What does this mean? Well, I think there's 4 technologies that are particularly important in terms of the transformation of business and the transformation of organizations. So in many ways, people talk about these as if they're something like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and that's why I have a picture in the bottom right there of one of the horsemen of the apocalypse. That's death. And I think that's completely overblown. I think these are much more opportunities than they are threats, but they are huge sources of transformation. And the four that I think all leaders need to be familiar with, and I'm not going to be talking at any length about these, but almost every business, every organization, these will be impacting, changing the nature of work, changing how the organization works, changing how decisions are made, products and services are provided. And those four are big data, AI, blockchain, and robotics. And I think those are the key technologies that built on the internet, using the internet, but then these are the actual technologies that really all businesses are going to be hugely impacted. The nature of work is going to shift as these become more and more a part of how we do business. And so leaders, first of all, need to know about this, right? So this is very important. There's some other ones that may be important and that I encourage you to have a look at depending on your industry, what you do, what your company's involved in. And there's a whole bunch of those Internet of Things, sharing economy. And these are things that you really need to be aware of and understand if you're in industries where these are having an impact. And things like Industry 4.0 has bigger impact in manufacturing industries and process industries than it does in service industries, for example. So these may or may not be important. These are really changing the nature of how we make decisions, changing the nature of work. And what's really important is I think people are framing this wrongly. It's not that that some percentage of jobs are going to be replaced by machines. It's that 100% of jobs are going to be changed by these technologies entering into organizations. The big data, AI, blockchain, and robotics are going to change the way we all do our jobs. Our job may or may not disappear. 20–30% of jobs may completely disappear. Yes, that's true. But all the jobs that remain and some new jobs that haven't been invented yet will appear, and they'll be different. And we need to understand as leaders and managers how this is going to happen and how this is going to work. Doesn't mean you need to be an expert. It doesn't mean you need to have some idea of these. Equally important for leaders is the fact that these technologies, all of these technologies, the internet and all of these other technologies are transforming society more broadly. And we could have a long conversation about what's good and what's not about this process, but from an organizational and leadership point of view, what's important is just that it's happening. And I have, there's a number of examples. Top left is Tinder, how we date, how we meet, how our relationships are initiated, and how they proceed has fundamentally shifted with various kinds of dating websites, also with the texting and the ways that we communicate with people as we develop a relationship, fundamentally different, to the point where now 20% of marriages in the United States started on digital dating sites. So this is 20–30% maybe now. It keeps going up every year. I haven't looked this year. Obviously, Facebook, hugely important. We've been hearing lots about it. Is it good or is it bad? Well, the point is it's there, and it's changed fundamentally people's experience of being friends, right? All the other apps that are around, and also the impact on democracy, also super important. To the point where this sign on the right, which I quite like, in case of fire, please leave the building before posting it on social media. Fundamentally, the way we live together and communicate as friends and families, and it's just changed. Right, and the fact that you need to tell people to leave the building before posting it is, I think, a testament to the level of change that we've witnessed. So business is changing, society more broadly is changing. What does this mean for leadership? Well, from my point of view, I'm putting a lot of things together that have happened in a lot of different research and also lots of experience working with companies around these things. We need to have a couple of things. One is people need to have a basic idea of those four technologies that I talked about. They need to have an idea. They don't need to be experts, but they need to be able to talk to experts. That's my measure of competence. You need to have, sort of the skills and understanding to be able to have conversations about those technologies. That's first requirement. That's just a basic skill thing. Just take some time, learn about these, learn how they work, and be prepared to think about and be involved in discussions about how your company and your industry is changing. Second, the thing about digital transformation is it's driven by disruption of industries. So industries are being disrupted all over the economy as digital and virtual versions of the activities of those industries and companies come into the context, into the industry, disrupt, move boundaries, change the way people do. Leaders need to have some sense of disruption of what that means for how we think strategically and how things are going to change. Second, we think we need to understand that this digitalization of society is creating a generational shift that means we need to learn to lead differently. The generation born since the internet and with these things like that, grew up with things like Google and Facebook, they have a different approach to communication, interaction. They're a different generation, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And then we need to have skills to create organizations with, I think, 3 important characteristics. One is customer centricity. So all firms have to become more customer centric, because the customer's experience of firms that are highly customer centric and use technology effectively is increasing expectations. Call that the Apple effect. We need to have a different way of experimenting and taking risks, and that also requires a change in culture. So very important to be able to have the skills and understanding that this is important, and the skills to make it happen in your organization. So I'll talk through that a bit. And remember, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in. I may answer them at the end, or I may answer them now, but feel free at any time so you don't forget them, because we really want to have some interaction with you at the end. Okay, so what's digital disruption? Well, this is the idea that the way that we do business is attacked by a new approach, something based around digital technology that often under traditional measures of quality doesn't look as good, but over time improves very quickly, right? And a new digital version or digitally enabled or digitally enhanced or digitally supported version of our product or service appears and basically, if we're not careful, puts us out of business, right? So how this works and how digital disruption occurs and its effect on organizations and on industry boundaries is a core part of being able to lead effectively. So the first thing we need from leaders in organizations as this digital transformation occurs is for them to understand and be able to spot disruption, or at least have the vocabulary to discuss it appropriately, and then also have some ideas about where it's likely to come from and how do you respond. If you're more ambitious, it can also be about understanding disruption deeply enough that you can be a disruptor. And how do we bring in digital technology to virtualize aspects of what we do and to create new kinds of value for our customers? So that question about digital disruption is key. And so I think it's very important for leaders to spend the time to learn, what does this really mean? Disruption, that term is used all the time by people commenting and writing and talking about different industries. And a lot of times it's not used correctly. It's used in a way that just means change. It's not really the fundamental disruption. That's really the new thing and the interesting thing that's happening with digital transformation. So I think that's really a useful and important set of tools that all leaders have. And if you already know all about that, that's great. And if you don't, I'd encourage you to find out a bit about that, because that's that whole area of strategy, looking at what disruption is, what digital disruption looks like, and then how does it proceed and what are the effect is really important. We have some industries where it's already largely occurred, and then there's lots of industries where this is just starting to happen. And the way in which industry boundaries shift and the way in which firms can respond is really, really interesting. I mean, one of my favorite examples is, of course, the hotel industry. So the appearance of Airbnb has fundamentally changed, and the Booking.com has fundamentally changed that industry. And what we've seen is the opposite of what people often expected, which is that organizations can go directly to their customers, that sort of disintermediation kind of idea. What we see instead in that industry, which is common, is that a new competitor has inserted themselves between the hotels and their customers, created a new substitute product, Airbnb, providing people's homes for rent, people's apartments for rent, and then Booking.com inserting itself between the hotels and the customer. And there's a great quote by one of the CEOs of one of the big hotel firms saying that this digital change has actually caused the mutation of the DNA of our industry. So the DNA of our industry has been fundamentally changed by this digital disruption of the normal ways that we did business. And it's understanding how that works and how fundamental that is that's really challenging and important for people. So if you already understand that, great. If you don't, I'd encourage you to go have a deeper look into those ideas, and there's lots of stuff written about it. You can Google it and have a look. It's really, I think, critical to understand how profound these disruptive challenges can be and the kinds of results that can happen when these new digital approaches to business come in. Right? Second, and I mentioned this already, is that there's this generational change. So but this one is driven by, generational change is always driven by life events. So there was a generation in the United States a generational shift that happened around the time of the first lunar landing and around the time of Woodstock. There's these big events that define generations, right? So if you can remember the moon landing, you're a baby boomer. If you can't, then you're probably the next generation, right? So there's this idea that these big events define World War II defined a particular generation. But in terms of the most recent changes, they've been to a unique extent driven by technology. So new technologies have come in. The appearance of these technologies has really changed the life experience of people, and also defined a shift between people who were born before and people who were born after the kind of internet, born so that they grew up with the internet or grew up without it. And we refer to those as based on the vocabulary provided by a big consulting firm as digital natives versus digital immigrants. And I think this shift is a really important one, and one which lots of organizations are working through right now. So the digital immigrants are the people who grew up in a digitally enabled world. For them, this is how the world is. Digital natives, that digital world appeared after they were already grown up, after they had already developed a way to engage with the world and with each other. Then the digital world was added on top of that. So this is quite different and quite challenging. Maybe 1980 is a good, if you're born after 1980 versus before 1980, is quite an important division. What does this mean? Well, it just means that your life, the way you live and your practices and the kind of expectations for communication and the ways in which you engage with others and with your work is different. So here's some statistics just to give you an idea. This is a set of just some of these generations that people propose, and this is whether you have your phone on and in bed with you or not. Right? What do you do with your phone? Do you leave your phone off and in another room, or is it beside your bed or in the bed with you and turned on? And this is the numbers. Millennials, right? 83% have the phone right there and turned on while they're sleeping, right? Whereas so there's the ones born after 1980, basically. And the other ones, as you go down, maturest would be my parents, right, who are in their 70s and 80s. Hardly any of them have their phone on next to their bed while sleeping. This difference, my mother, for example, she only turns her mobile phone on when she wants to make a call. And even though I tell her, leave your phone on, Mom, I want, so I can call you, she says, no, it wastes the battery, right? So this is a very different perspective and very different relationship with technology that produces very different expectations and very different organizational requirements to make these people productive and happy. Right? Tattoos, just another quick one. The generation born since the internet, sort of Generation X and millennials, very large numbers of tattoos compared to older people, and the tattoos mean something completely different, right? Tattoos now are about creating an identity. They don't necessarily mean anything about people being in some way counterculture. Yeah, it's now culture, not counterculture, right? And 15% of millennials report having 5 or more tattoos. That's a lot of tattoos. Here's my favorite, think different. Right? That's a serious Apple fan. Okay, so why is this important? Well, for you as a leader, this is really important because what this means is you're going to have multiple generations at work, and increasingly we're seeing 3 or 4 generations at work. And as a leader, the demands on you to understand how to manage this level of diversity. It's good. It increases cognitive diversity on your teams, which is really valuable. But it's also challenging because it means there's a set of communication, interaction, work practice differences that are really fundamental to the nature of diversity on the team. So what you need to be is really clear where issues are happening around generational differences. Understand that you need to have different communication and coaching style with different generations of people. Right? And there's a lot of stuff written about this, and this is a really important area. This increasing sort of generational difference, also because we're seeing increasing number of people who are returning to work after having retired. So these returnees who are going off and retiring for a while, then getting bored and coming back, are even making this even more pronounced. So I was recently at an organization, Bentley, the car company, and they had someone over 90 working in their marketing department. So that person who was running that team had a 90-year-old and a 23-year-old on the team. That's a huge generational gap to be managing. So this is a very important leadership skill. Also some changes in culture. The culture is this sort of how we work together, right? It's what around here, how do we do things, right? And there's a technical definition there from Ed Schein at MIT, but the idea is just how we do things. How do we interact? How do we communicate? What's the standard, the normal kind of way we work together? This became very clear to me. This is a picture of a workspace by a unicorn that basically in Canada that does that provides white label websites for people who are doing for shopping websites. So they do lots and lots and lots of websites for people who are want to sell whatever online. Very successful company. And I went to their office. I was going around and discussing, meeting their people and talking to the gentleman who runs this office. And he was saying, just explaining what people do. And we came to him, and I said to him, I noticed you don't have any landlines. Oh, where's the landline? And it was very interesting to watch because it took him a minute to remember what a landline was. And then, of course, he said, why would we have a landline? People, they work wherever they want. They can sit at these desks, but it's not like people have a desk. They can sit where they want. They can work where they want. There's no landline. It wouldn't make any sense. That's the opposite of my organization here at Imperial College, where every office has to have a landline. And the idea of not having a landline in an office is kind of unthinkable, right? That's very different culture, right? Very different way of thinking about work and the standard way people work and how you work and what's role. There aren't any offices here in this organization. Here in Imperial, there's lots of offices. So it's quite a different kind of culture, obviously. So the question is if you're a leader, what kind of culture do you need to create to make your organization able to deal with digital disruption and be successful, maybe even at creating digital disruption, right? I think there's a couple things. First of all, there's a question about risk, and I think organizations are much better able to take advantage of digital technology and are much better able to more likely to produce digital disruption than the victim of it when they're able to encourage a bit of risk-taking, right? And this really means differentiating between good failure and bad failure, or good success and bad success. Good failure is failure where we tried and we learned, right? It didn't work, but it didn't work simply because it was never going to work, but we did at least learn a lot, and that's fine. So, and a good success is a success which we planned and we did everything perfectly and it succeeded for the reasons we thought it would. Bad success is that we succeeded, but we don't know why. Right? And what we want to be doing, the organizations that are good at this, is they reward good success and they reward good failure equally. Right? They're not just over-rewarding success. Because if you over-reward success, first of all, you're not really rewarding what you want, which is learning. Right? And second of all, you're discouraging people from taking risks. So really what we want is give people a chance to take a lot of risk, but not in a way where they're taking crazy risks, but where they understand that taking a risk is fine. And if you take a risk, but you do it for good reasons in a good way and learn lots, then that's a good failure, right? So this is very important. So this is really, so you have to think, how do we need to act? In my organization right now, what do we really reward? Are we only rewarding failure, or are we rewarding taking good risks? Right? And that's a real question to ask yourself about culture. You need to create a culture where good risk taking is rewarded. Just parallel to this is experimentation. So part of risk taking, why you take risk taking, is to run experiments. And we know lots about this. There's tons of discussion about this in the entrepreneurial community. Right? The idea of lean innovation and sort of the minimum viable product and doing things quickly and cheaply. This is really taken hold in the entrepreneurial community. And in other organizations, this is super valuable. So realizing that it's not about creating projects that necessarily fail, but it's about creating little experiments that we can do quickly, we can do cheaply, and that we can test our assumptions before we do the big project. So what we're trying to do is not create a huge organizational change, but try to do right off. What we're going to do is test our assumptions, our hypotheses, create hypotheses based on our assumptions about the world, test them before we invest a lot. So we learn to run experiments. And this is something very dear to our hearts at Imperial here, because Imperial College is a science and technology university. We believe in experiments, and I think this is fundamental to success in digitally transformed businesses, or businesses that are undergoing digital transformation, is learning to run experiments, because the appearance of digital technology and all of the opportunities that creates also creates extreme uncertainty. Experimentation allows you to get out there and try out some of your ideas about how the world is changing without risking the farm. But you need to learn how to do that. You need to learn how to run experiments cheaply and effectively, maximizing your learning, minimizing the cost, and minimizing the time. Doing things quickly, right? Quickly, effectively, but getting the information you need, right? An example on the right on the top is it's just trying different emails rather than trying to do. So this government wanted to send Department for Business wanted to try to think about how to make their emails more effective. They could have done a bunch of interviews, but what they just did is did some trials. Let's send out some emails this way, some emails that way, and see which ones we get more response to. But you see, this is a different way of thinking about the problem. It's not finding out the information and then doing something. It's doing something to find out the information, and this is really a critical thing. And learning to experiment rather than the analysis and then project idea, but actually this is an experiment. We're doing it quick, and the point of this is just to get information. Is really I think a different way of thinking. And I think a lot of organizations fail because they don't learn to experiment, and they're attacked by new entrants or by big players from outside their industry. And then they don't experiment. They think they know, and they don't experiment to test their assumptions. And by not experimenting, they make fundamental mistakes. You can think of Nokia and Apple. Nokia thought they knew, but the world had shifted because of the technology changes that were driven by digital transformation. And Nokia thought they knew. They didn't test those things. They kept doing what they did. And Apple, of course, destroyed the business, right? So this experimentation thing, I think, is really, really important. Okay, let's come back to that in a sec. Thank you, Paul. I'll come back to that in a sec. I'm just about done, actually, and then we can have a conversation. So if you have your questions ready, that'd be excellent. I just have one more here. Putting the customer at the core, I think this fits into the other ones about risk and experimentation. Those really only work if what you're doing is completely focused on whoever your customer is, whether it's an internal customer, external customer, whether it's business to business or business to consumer. Everyone has a customer, right? And all this experimentation and all the risk taking you're doing is always about how can we become better at really understanding what our customer wants and really providing our customer what they want, whether it's a more traditional product or whether it's a digital product or a combined product that's partially digital and partially traditional. Doesn't make any difference. What's important is we're completely focused on our customer. Customer's at the core of what we're doing, and we're using experimentation and risk-taking to get to know our customer, and then to try to do some things quickly and effectively to really respond to what our customer wants. And this, again, is, I think, a fundamental change for many organizations that are technology-driven or driven by history, and are not really focused on their customer. Those organizations are going to fail as digital transformation occurs, right? I always like this picture on the bottom between brand-centric and customer-centric products. Of course, the one is made to display the brand nicely, and the other one is made for what the customer really wants. So plastic squeezable with you don't have a problem to get the ketchup out of the bottle on the right with the right-hand product. The only reason you have that problem is because Heinz insists on making the bottle that way, right? So this is a customer-centric product versus tradition-centered. This is how we do it kind of way that many organizations get trapped in. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. And what I want to take away from this is that digital transformation is a huge phenomenon that's happening across society and across the economy. Organizations in different sectors and different industries have been differently challenged by this up till now, but it's happening everywhere, and it's going to happen much more than it already happened. There's many different things about digital transformation, but part of it is what it requires leaders to be. They need to develop this kind of digital intelligence in addition to the emotional intelligence that you already have. That means understanding something about these technologies and how they affect industry. So there's a technology issue. You need to learn about the technology strategy issue. How does this impact organizations and industries? And then some new skills for effectively managing, something about managing multi-generational teams, something about creating jobs and cultures that get people excited and allow them to create the kind of change that either produces digital transformation or else that lets you respond to digital transformation. So as a leader, you need to be thinking about these things. How do I retool? What do I need here? I've been successful, or I am successful, but what else? What am I going to need to really be successful in the future? And I'm suggesting these are some of the things. So, if you're interested in these things, I teach a course on this stuff, so we're very happy if you would like to join us for a course. Or there's lots of other opportunities. You can talk to Exec Ed, or you can contact me directly, and I'm happy to have a chat about any of these things too with you also. So we do a course, and there's other courses as well, as happy to discuss this if you have particular questions. But right now, I want to get to your questions. So I have one here from Paul. So let's see what Paul has to say for himself. And please just type in any questions you have. So Paul says, one of the challenges I face in my organization is the digital skills gap. Particular people who think they get or are digital, but really don't have the requirement, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay. How do you think leaders? Well, I think what I've been seeing in organizations is different degrees of different kinds of activity depending on who they're trying to train. So the digital skills gap is quite different, lower in the organization because those people are often younger, and higher in the organization. Higher in the organization, if you're talking about more senior managers and things, then I think what you see is people needing, first of all, to understand just how fundamental the impact of these new technologies and new things are, and the strategic aspects of them. So if you're talking about more senior leaders, I work with those people a lot. With them, it's about the strategic implications of this. More junior people in the organization, some of them are already very skilled. They intuitively understand the importance of these technologies, but often need technical training. And those in many ways are much easier because you can do those even through online courses and things like that. Online courses, and also speakers are lots of organizations have me, and people like me come in and talk about aspects of this. And the implications of digital transformation for marketing, the implications of digital transformation for sales, for also innovation. Well, how do we think about innovation when more and more of our product or service is digital? So I think there's a set of a portfolio of things that you need to engage in. First of all, I think with junior people, they understand more younger people tend to understand the importance of this. They need this knowledge and skills. Senior people, I spend a lot of time working with companies, convincing senior people that this is really important and you need to do it. So your challenge is a bit different and your tools are a bit different, but there's a kind of portfolio of things you really need to be engaging with to throughout the organization, give people what they need. And I think thinking about competencies is useful. So thinking about what are the competencies I need people at different levels in the different parts of my organization to have with respect to digital, and getting them to getting people engaged, figuring out ways for them to do that. And I think this is a super good question, because I know many companies. I was just talking to a large financial services company 2 weeks ago, and then this morning I was talking with a consulting firm about this exact issue. How do we motivate people that this is important? And then what is it important for different people to learn? I also think that there's especially for more senior people, but all through the organization, there's an ethical component to this. So what is it, what kind of new ethical challenges does this create, and how is my organization going to deal with this to avoid having some major issues? So talking to a big financial services firm, it's like there are new ethical issues that these technologies bring up. Are your senior managers prepared to deal with these? So these are very, very important. So this is a great question, Paul. Digital transformation in the industry. So in the utility sector, there's, I think sector by sector, this is really interesting. I think in the energy industry, Internet of Things is super important, as is big data. And I think, Internet of Things will transform the energy industry in the sense of making it increasingly efficient, effective, and less polluting. Also, more and more of the value of the industry will move to people who are good at predicting, managing customer needs. So people there's a cartoon which I don't have handy about who you think your energy company is, and it's a big building with lots of people in offices. Who your energy company really is, and it's two guys sitting in a cafe, right? Because it's really it's about data. And in fact, I think digital transformation in the longer term in the energy industry will involve actually you having pieces of software that represent you in markets, where you're basically changing your energy supplier by the second, right? And this will be happening across all kinds of utilities, where markets become more and more efficient, less and less people are involved, and you don't have an energy supplier in the sense of you're connected to an energy company. You have pieces of software that represent you in different markets, and that's really interesting, and that's all about trust. So I think that's a really great example of an industry which is very traditional, but under huge disruptive pressure, and where things are going to change a lot very quickly. Okay, let's see what else we got here. So Dina, that's very good. If you can send me an email if you want to talk more about that. Okay, so Jacob asked a question about billable hours. What if I was in a professional services organization, what I would do is look at your new competitors that are appearing, which are websites that provide teams of people who organize themselves through a platform to provide services for organizations directly. So if I want to engage I have a marketing project, I want to engage some marketing people to do some marketing project, I go onto a website, I post my work, and people bid on that, and they form themselves into a team. They all have reviews from their previous work, and they form themselves into a team and offer it at a particular price. These are, I think, hugely challenging for professional service firms. And what I would do to increase the interest in adopting new technology is show people what's happening outside of the big professional service firms in terms of the provision of professional services, and say, if we don't learn to compete with this, we're in serious danger of being disrupted. So I think focus on the disruptors that are coming in and say, look, we need to do stuff if we're going to we need to change fundamentally how we work if we're going to take on these disruptive competitors, because you don't need the overhead of a huge firm with partners and huge costs if you have a system and a platform that just, the big professional service firms are the black cabs of black cab, version, the professional services version of the black cabs, right? And what we have is, of course, Uber, and that's going to be an Uber version for professional services. So this is really challenging, and you need to use this threat to encourage your colleagues to really think about this, and to really to start really figuring out what are we going to do and how are we going to use technology to provide a competitive product. But one thing I will say, Jacob, is that actually professional services my professional service firms, in my experience, are actually doing quite well in terms of thinking this through. I had a meeting with a professional service firm this morning, and they're very far. They've had a lot of things. I'm sure this is going on in your firm, but the more you can accelerate it, the better. Thank you, Troy. Public customer centricity with public sector clients. Yeah, with customer centricity, I'd encourage you to, if you haven't looked at that literature in marketing, it's super interesting, and there's lots of video talks and articles and things you can find on the web to talk a little bit about this. It seems on the surface quite obvious, but it's also very, and there's a lot to it to get it right, to really be customer centric, to really get at what customers really want, and to really be focused. And in this case, when you talk about public sector clients, you need to think, it's often not about them, it's about who they're then providing services to on the other side. They're in between you and whoever it is that's public sector clients, whoever it is that's they're serving. So in that case, you're often, in customer centricity tells us, you're finding out what your customer wants, but that may be based on what their customer wants. So in that case, it's really a challenge to think, what actually will make you better in terms of my client better in terms of looking after their customers or their clients, right? So there's a challenge. So I encourage you to have a look at that. And if you want to talk to someone, we have lots of marketing people here who know lots about that stuff. Stuart, how can we overcome the perceived risk to company security? Yeah. So we have to balance this, of course. So that's a really good question, Stuart. Like the more digitized we become, the more important security becomes. And I think in order to get both your clients / customers to trust you to use this new technology and the data they give you, but also to keep from running into some of these ethical problems, you have to make sure that security is your security systems, and of course the biggest risk to security is always the members of your organization, and you have to make sure your culture and your systems and processes are up to the task of ensuring that security is in place. So this just means that as part of your discussion about digital transformation, part of that discussion is always about security, how we do things, how we work, that everyone in the organization understands the challenge of security, right? So that should always be part of, as soon as you're in the digital world, cybersecurity is really fundamentally important. And in fact, I think what we're learning is that part of the problem occurs not because the problems aren't solvable, but because people don't bother to solve them or don't realize how important it is to solve them. And you asking this question means that you're aware of this. So then it's just a matter of getting connected with the right people to get this in place, because these problems, and the other part of it is figuring out in your organization where are the critical points where we need a crisis management plan. If you get that in place, then so here's how this is going to work. If we have a crisis, here's the group of people who are going to be involved in dealing with it. This is how it's going to happen. Here's the phone numbers, because it always happens at 2 in the morning, and you need this kind of in place. So as soon as you have these critical bits of data / systems, you need systems to protect them and systems to deal with if that protection fails. If that's all in place, that's all you can do. Okay. Anyway, very interesting question, Stuart, and cybersecurity is an interest of mine, so I could go on endlessly, but I'll stop there. And if you have more questions, please do get in contact. Oh, good. I'm glad, Paul. I'm glad you liked it. Yeah, I think that risk and experiment. That if you take one thing away, the two things I think that are just to remember, the most important things, the generational change and that added dimension of diversity on your teams. That's one thing, and then risk experiment is the other one, because risk and experimentation go together, and then they're always focused on customers, right? So risk and experimentation. So if you take those things away, I will feel like I've succeeded today. Okay, very good. If there's no other questions, then I think that's all I have to say for today. I think we were supposed to stop a couple minutes ago. So thank you all very much, and I hope you have. I wish you the best of luck with all these interesting problems, and we'll hopefully have further conversations another time. All right.